Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar, MOOCs 101, sponsored by TrainingPros. Currently, you are muted. We have we have about over 100 folks enrolled in the webinar, and so muting is necessary. However, you can send us questions during the webinar using the chat feature, just as you see on your screen. It should be on the right side of your screen, and it may be minimized, so you may have to open that up if you want to use it or enlarge it. We'll be doing our best to keep up with your questions through the questions and chat area, but we will have about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for Q&A with our presenter. I'd also like to point out that this webinar will be posted on the TrainingPros website shortly after the webinar, and our website address will be provided at the end of the presentation. And we'll just wait as I see lots of folks jumping in right now, so we'll just wait a few minutes. And I'll probably repeat this introductory message one more time before we move on. So again, for folks that have just joined us, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, MOOCs 101, sponsored by TrainingPros. Folks, you are muted. We have over 100 folks enrolled in the webinar, so it's necessary to mute everyone. However, you can send us questions during the webinar using the chat feature, just as you see on your screen. It's on the right-hand side of your screen. It may be minimized. You may have to expand it to see that. We'll be doing our best to keep up with your questions through the chat area, but we will have about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for Q&A with our presenter. I'd like to point out that this webinar will be posted on the TrainingPros website shortly after the presentation. We are recording it, and our website address will be provided at the end of the presentation. All right, at this time, let's go ahead and we have a poll that we'd like to start with. Seems to have slowed down a little bit, the folks joining in, so we'll go ahead and put this poll up. We'd like to take a quick survey to find out how familiar our audience, all of you, are with MOOCs. Note that you may check all the answers that apply. Please answer the question, and I'll share the results in just a minute. Okay, we have about 72% voted. We'll leave it open for just a little bit longer. About 85% voted. And here we'll go ahead and show our results. So as you can see, the large majority of the folks on the line don't know what MOOC even stands for. So you're in the right place. You're going to find that out. For those of you that have considered using a MOOC in your curricula, it's just going to give you a little bit more to think about as far as whether MOOCs might be right for you. And then some of the other folks, we have just a few folks that have actually delivered a MOOC. Only 6%, as you can see, that have actively used MOOCs, and 23% have attended a MOOC already. All right. So with that initial survey over with, I'd like to just kind of introduce myself, and then I'll introduce our presenter. My name is David Edelman. I've been a training professional for over 20 years with companies like Merck, Disney, and Assurant. And currently I'm a relationship manager with TrainingPros. And TrainingPros is a company that works with mostly large organizations in their training and development departments to identify, attract, and onboard contract professionals for very specific and specialized training and development needs. And next, I'd like to introduce our and I'd like to let you know that if you are a contract professional and interested in being considered for work with our clients, please go to www.trainingpros.com to join our team, and we'll have our website address up at the end of the presentation. All right, next I'd like to introduce our facilitator for this webinar, Dr. Stephen W. Harmon. After majoring in English literature at Furman University, Dr. Harmon moved to Upper Egypt to teach fourth grade English for 2 years, and it was while traveling through the Middle East and Africa that he realized the tremendous need and scarce resources for education and training in developing countries. Dr. Harmon holds a master's and doctorate in instructional technology with a cognate in global policy studies from the University of Georgia. Well, Steve returned to his native Atlanta along with about 15 million other people just in time for the Summer Olympics in 1996, and joined the faculty in middle, secondary education and instructional technology at Georgia State University, first as an assistant and then as an associate professor. Dr. Harmon also serves as the Director of Learning Technologies in the College of Education. His research centers on educational uses of emerging technologies and is focused on e-learning for the last few years, particularly with respect to synchronous online learning environments. He is the President-elect and has served as President of both the Division of Learning and Performance Environments and of the Research and Theory Division for the Association of Educational Communications and Technology. He serves as an evaluator for the Commission on Colleges of the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. He has worked professionally with a wide variety of organizations, including Apple Computers, AT&T, the United States Air Force, Delta Airline, and CARE, among many others. Going back to his experience in the Middle East and Africa, Steve also conducts research on educational technology in developing countries. He's also worked in several Middle Eastern and African countries, including as a consultant for USAID's Education for Development and Democracy Initiative in Botswana. Dr. Harmon has over 120 professional publications and presentations and was the 2011 recipient of Georgia State University's Innovative Instruction Award. So as you can imagine, I was delighted to be able to assist Dr. Harmon on this presentation and to have him as our facilitator. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, David, and everyone for being here. I sure appreciate the chance to speak with you. Let me put a plug in as well for our program. We offer a Master of Science in Instructional Design and Technology, and also a PhD in Instructional Technology. And the Master's is online, so shoot me an email if you're interested in that sort of higher education. Today, though, our purpose is to learn a little bit about MOOCs. MOOCs 101, we call it. And we'll see why that's almost a difficult thing to do as we get on into the presentation. Really what we want you to come out of this with is to be able to make informed decisions about MOOCs. We wrote Speak Intelligently, and that's probably okay, but I'm sure you could all speak intelligently anyway, just because you're the kind of people you are that came here. But I'd like to start by giving you some background about MOOCs, and I'll explain what MOOCs are in just a minute. But I'd like to start by giving you some background about MOOCs, and it's going to be some way back background because I would like to start with the Emperor Tiberius around 35 AD. And this is a picture of the emperor's office. It's nice to be the emperor, I think. Now, Tiberius had been a very successful Roman emperor and spent most of his career amassing great wealth throughout all of the known world at the time. And around 35-ish AD, we're told by Pliny the Elder, who was a historian that wrote about Tiberius, that a local goldsmith in Rome came to Tiberius and told him that he had discovered a method of taking the most scarce metal, the most valuable metal that they knew of, and making it abundantly. He could just make tons of this metal, and he was super excited and knew that Tiberius would be really excited about this as well. Tiberius, being no fool, realized, of course, that if you could suddenly make this metal really, really abundantly, all of his stores of it would become worthless, because there would be way too much of it. So he did what any good Roman emperor of the time would do, and he had the goldsmith executed. And when that happened, the secret of making that metal was lost for nearly another 2,000 years. Another 2,000 years went by, and we couldn't do it. In fact, this metal remains so valuable that even well into the 1800s, it was still far more valuable than gold or platinum. Napoleon III would have state dinners and invite all the important guests, and the sub-tier of important guests would eat on plates of gold and use silverware of gold, but the really, really important guests would eat on silverware or tableware made of this metal. Do you know what it is? Has anyone been able to guess what the metal is that we're talking about here? I'll give you a second if you want to type that in and see. Well, you might be surprised to know it's aluminum. Aluminum was one time incredibly valuable, more valuable than gold or any of the other known metals. Today, though, we have it everywhere. We make it into foil that we throw away. In fact, aluminum is actually the third most common metal in the Earth's crust. There's a lot of it there. But it doesn't exist in its raw form. You have to be able to know how to extract it. In fact, we used to think aluminum was scarce, but it wasn't really scarce. It really was that we just didn't know how to get at the aluminum. And that leads to this notion here that scarcity may really be a function of access. Now, Peter Diamandis talks about this whole concept in a book called Abundance, which he covers a lot of things. It's just one little area in it. But I was thinking about that, and I thought, well, you know what? That really applies to MOOCs, because I'm going to get back to MOOCs. Because one of the things that sort of generated the interest in MOOCs today is another shift where we had a resource that we thought was scarce, something we thought we really didn't have a lot of, but it turns out we just haven't been able to access it very well, and that resource is actually abundant. I'm speaking now, of course, about information. For many, many years, information was closely guarded and closely held, typically by universities. If you wanted to get some information, you had to go to the university, and if you stayed there long enough, eventually they would impart some of the secrets to you. And in fact, even in quite recent times, in some universities still, unfortunately, they lock up the library at night because they don't want the undergraduates roaming around amidst all the dangerous information. Universities have operated in this environment of information scarcity. Well, we know now that that's not the case. We know now that there's plenty of information out there. In fact, the amount of information is staggering and growing rapidly. From the dawn of time to about the year 2003, humanity had generated about 5 exabytes of information. I'll talk about what an exabyte is in a second. So from dawn of time to 2003, total amount of recorded information about 5 exabytes. Now we generate 5 exabytes of information every 2 days in humanity. So that's only from 2003 to now. Every 2 days we're generating that much. In fact, in 2011 we generated 1.8 zettabytes of information. Now these may be new terms for you, exabytes and zettabytes and whatnot. So let me give you an example. An exabyte, say, is about that much. A zettabyte looks like about that much. Remember, some of you may remember kilobytes, back when we first got into computers and we had to learn what a kilobyte was. Some of you may remember bytes, maybe even bits. But we had bytes and then kilobytes, and before long we went from kilobytes to megabytes. I remember getting a Macintosh computer with a 20 megabyte hard drive, and that was the be-all and end-all. We could never use that much space. Well, megabytes turned out not to last very long, and we got into gigabytes. And so now gigabytes is where we're comfortable, I guess, our unit of knowing how much information that is. But already we see we're moving into terabytes. I have a couple of little terabyte drives on my computer right now, and I've just read they're putting out a terabyte USB flash drive as well. So a gigabyte is 1,000 megabytes. A terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes. A petabyte is 1,000 terabytes. Exabyte, 1,000 petabytes. Zettabyte, 1,000 exabytes. So that's a lot of information, but it's still kind of hard for us to grasp how much information that is. So think about it this way. If a cup of coffee represented the volume of a gigabyte of information. So that cup of coffee represents a volume of 1 gigabyte of information. Then an exabyte of information would have the same volume as the Great Wall of China. That's a lot of information, a big difference. And right now, estimates say we're on track to be generating an exabyte of information every day by 2015. So just in 2 years, we expect to be generating that enormous amount of information. So information is not scarce. There's plenty of it out there, and neither is it any longer hard to get to. Access to information has increased just as much as information itself has. What was once the province, the limited province of universities and scholarly institutions, not so much the case anymore. Let me ask another question. Take a second and look at all of the things listed on this screen here and see if you can tell me what they all have in common. Type in some answers in the chat box if you can come up with something that they all have in common. So we've got some notions of information and numbers, and they're all obsolete. Good answers. Again, they all have information to do with them. If you look at these things, I mean, some of them are really different. You know, if you have movie theaters and flashlights and board games, world-class educations, airline tickets, well, all the answers that I'm seeing are on the right track, but there's a simpler answer, and that is that all of these things that we see right here have been replaced by this. All of these many different ideas, we carry them in our pocket now. Dictionaries, translators, atlases, stereos. I've even seen an app for a ukulele where you have the bottom half of the ukulele on your iPad and then the left-hand top neck of the ukulele on your iPhone. You put them together and can play a virtual ukulele. So exactly, all can be done by computer, and not any computer, but a really small computer that we have lots of access to. So this notion now that suddenly information, once the scarce province of a few elite institutions, is now hugely abundant and hugely available to all of us, has been one of the things that's kind of inspired this whole notion of MOOCs. MOOCs stand for Massive Open Online Courses, and they come from the words here. You can kind of break these apart a little bit and get some deeper meaning. Of course, courses is sort of the unit of the MOOC. MOOCs typically are different than, say, a Wikipedia entry because it's designed to be a course. They're online, that makes sense. That's how we access all this information now. They're open in that anyone, anywhere with access to the internet can enroll in these courses. So they don't have any entrance requirements. There's no caps for the amount of enrollment, which leads to the M, which is massive. The word massive, it was used in this sort of context initially in gaming, and you may be familiar with the massive multiplayer online role-playing games, or MMORPGs, and things like, well, World of Warcraft is the most popular of these, or has been the most popular. At one time had 15 million players all playing this online game. And that idea of the gaming sort of allowed us to realize, wow, you can have a lot of people interacting at once. And so you put all these things together, and with the notion of easily accessible courseware, and you kind of come up with a MOOC. I'll talk again in a second about how we got to this stage, but that's sort of the gist of it. Giant, potentially giant free courses that are online available to everybody. If you go down a level and look at what a MOOC is, and you try to read about what a MOOC is, well, it's kind of a mess. Because what happened is people started doing MOOCs before there was, in fact there still is, no agreed upon definition of what a MOOC is other than it's a big course that's online. It's the same kind of thing that we saw with blended learning if you remember that and are still use blended learning. It's the idea you take all these different ideas, different technologies, and mix them together in some sort of course, and you call it blended learning. For many of us who call ourselves instructional technologists, or really we call ourselves learning technologists now where I am, but this is what we do all the time, and we don't think of it as blended learning. It's just how we do learning. You know, we're a very pragmatic group, and we look at whatever works and try to put that into our courses. For those people who are more steeped in traditional sorts of training and development, it may seem unusual and blended. So, but MOOCs are kind of in this same stage now, where they're kind of realized they've got something going that they're not sure what it is, and they're trying to add in many things to it. In fact, you'll see that blended learning, or hybrid learning is a term that is used as well, are now also considered to be part of the MOOC movement. Flipped classrooms is another thing that they've brought in and count as part of MOOCs. So MOOCs are in this giant stage where they're kind of grabbing every little pedagogy or technology and saying, oh yeah, that's part of what our MOOC is. Most of them are not that way at all, as we'll see in a few minutes. But they're still in sort of an exploratory stage of defining what makes up the core of a MOOC. What I'll say to you is basically the core is still just in the title, massive open online course. And how that course looks, well, it's just as varied as it is for any course you might attend. Now, MOOCs got started, and there are several sort of threads that came together to get MOOCs going. One of them was, of course, the Khan Academy. You may be familiar with Salman Khan, who initially started out, he was a Wall Street financier, broker type of guy, and started out creating online lessons using Camtasia or something like that for his nieces and nephews about how to help them with their schoolwork. And he found out that the nieces and nephews preferred the little programs he was putting online, the little presentations, to working with him in person. And then he noticed that lots of other people were logging in and seeing his programs. And then he started getting some press, and Bill Gates got involved and gave him a lot of money to create the Khan Academy, which is now this pretty large collection of tutorials, problem work-throughs, I guess you'd call it, in a wide variety of subjects. He's got over 1,600 of them, and it's been pretty popular. He gets about 70,000 views every day. He's had over 18 million total views.
Sorry, folks, it looks like the audio just dropped. You are hearing that. You can just be patient for a moment. I'm sure Steve will be able to, Dr. Harmon will be able to log back on.
Yeah, so Steve is still on. He just doesn't seem to be broadcasting audio.
Bear with us for just a moment.
So should we go ahead and run the next poll while we're waiting on Dr. Harmon to come back?
Good idea, Leanne.
Okay. Oh, he's back.
Oh.
Are you back, Dr. Harmon? No? Okay.
Okay.
So we'll skip a couple slides ahead and go ahead and launch a poll.
Okay, as soon as Dr. Harmon gets back on, we'll find out a little bit more about the history of MOOCs and where MOOCs are now. And we'll jump ahead to a little bit a poll that we had. And our question is, what kind of impact will MOOCs have on education? And we're going to ask this twice, once about education and once about training and development. But this first poll is just about education. So if you can go ahead and just take a moment to answer that question. Of course, some of these answers are a little silly, but Take just a moment.
Can you hear me again?
Yes.
I hope
Carmen.
Oh, so sorry about that. Bizarrely, my network just completely crashed. Never happened before with that. Working with technology, as my major professor used to say, is kind of like doing a wild animal act. You never know when the horse is going to pee on the stage. Sorry about that.
So in your absence, we went ahead and did a poll.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm. We started the first poll on education. What kind of impact will MOOCs have on education? And it looks like folks, the large majority of folks think that it will have a pretty significant impact on education. Over 67% said it'll have about as much impact as Amazon has affected bookstores, which, as we know, is a pretty large impact.
Wow, great. Oh, interesting to know. Okay, where did I get kicked off? Because I was still talking for a while.
You were finishing up talking about Khan Academy.
Talking about Khan Academy.
Khan Academy? Okay. Well, let me move on then with this sort of the modern history of MOOCs. And part of it, so Khan Academy gave us this idea that lots of people could take part in a course. And while that was going on, around about the same time, MIT had this notion of OpenCourseWare. And what they decided to do at MIT was to get their faculty to put their courses online. Now, initially, this kind of meant some people put a syllabus online. Later, people would add notes or reading materials, and then eventually some people started putting lectures online. And so they built this notion up as free open courseware that anyone could access for that. And so that was kind of going on. Meanwhile, let me say this, meanwhile, up in Canada, Stephen Downes and George Siemens had been working with a similar kind of notion, but on a somewhat smaller scale of opening up some of their courses. They would have paying students who would pay for credit at their university, but they would also allow other people outside the university to join in those courses, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But the real kickoff, the thing that really got MOOCs on the radar, came out of Sebastian Thrun at Stanford University in 2009 when he got the idea to take a course on artificial intelligence and open that up and allow anyone to sign in to this course. Well, he got 160,000 students signed up for that. Just kind of amazed them that they had so many to do that. And they considered it a huge success. So that prompted them to then form this company called Udacity. So they did that and formed Udacity, which is still going out as a big course. The formation of that and the idea that now universities started to realize that they were not the secret keepers of information panicked a lot of university presidents, and it led them to say, well, we need to jump on this bandwagon as well. So a lot of universities got together and partnered with a company called Coursera, and they founded this big course consortium of universities where Coursera is a company that aggregates, I guess, university courses and puts them together. And then MIT didn't want to lose the impetus they had with the OpenCourseWare project, so they created this MIT-X and then got Harvard on board with them, and now they call that edX. And they're the same kind of notion. They allow these courses for free. But part of the idea is that they needed to monetize or capitalize on it somehow. And so one of the ways they've thought to do this is that you can get credit from MIT or Harvard through the edX program if you do the MOOC and then take the test at the end and pass the test. The catch is they charge you for the test. So the MOOC is free, but you take the test. And then I misspoke. You don't get credit. You get a certificate that says you've attended this particular MOOC. And you have the OpenCourseWare Consortium is a group of universities that are still back in the OpenCourseWare idea, putting their content online, just like MIT started out doing that. So it's been growing and growing. And here's Coursera, by the way, the many partners that they have. This is last year. They've got lots more than this, where people they've reached out to universities and brought them on and tried to get them to take part in this. Now, interestingly, a lot of these universities have been joining out of fear more than anything else. Some of the university administrations, typically they don't notice learning technologies, but they've noticed this MOOC idea because now they're no longer the secret keepers of information. And so they said, well, we've got to take part and we've got to jump into this. So fear has been a pretty good motivator on the university side, as much as the idea of profit or spreading knowledge around to everybody that gets it. So you already did this poll here. Did you do this one? What kind of impact? So that's education. So that's where the bulk of the MOOC movement has been. Have you looked at training and development? What sort of impact do you think it might have there?
We haven't taken that poll yet, Dr.
Well, let's do that briefly and see what we think at this point. So some of these choices are purposely vague, but we don't want to pin you down too much. Give you the opportunity to take a shot at the general arena of MOOCs on training and development. There's a comment that universities joined out of fear. I don't mean to say that all universities joined out of fear. That's certainly not the case. There are certainly some universities who joined out of a desire to increase their brand or actually promote learning to a greater number of people. Some may have joined to make a profit. But I would argue that some did join out of fear, that some universities have been, at least at the upper administration level, they've been somewhat fearful that if they don't take part, they'll be left behind. Yeah, but I didn't mean that to be a blanket statement covering all universities. All right, we've got the poll results here, and they're difficult for me to see, so maybe, David, you could walk us through.
Yeah, Steve, Dr. Harmon, when we talked about education, the overwhelming majority thought that it was going to have a really huge impact. Now we see when we're talking about the training and development field, it's fairly close, 46%, about as much as speech recognition has had on personal computing, which is somewhat of an impact, but not as dramatic an impact as fiber optics have impacted communication, which comes in at 50%. And of course, the flying cars have not really affected transportation much. We only had a small group. So it's pretty much split between a major impact or kind of a partial impact.
Okay, good. And then that's probably where the country is, but maybe we'll change our mind after this. There's a question about how much it costs versus the charge for the tests. And right now, the idea of building the MOOC, that cost is being absorbed by the different institutions that are doing it. And I actually don't know how much they charge for the test. One of the caveats about this is it's still difficult to get credit. So you can get a certificate, but it's difficult to get credit for a MOOC. And I've seen one estimate that at the University of Maryland, where they do have some mechanism for offering credit for a MOOC, it costs about $1,300 to get course credit for a MOOC there. So it can still be very expensive to translate your MOOC completions into some sort of course credit. In my own institution, by the way, at Georgia State, we did decide a couple of weeks ago to offer credit for MOOCs, but we decided to do it exactly the same as we offer credit for any other thing. So in order to get credit for a MOOC at my institution, you have to be enrolled in the university that did it. You have to have a transcript. You have to have the passing grade. The university has to be accredited. So not any MOOCs really are doing that yet. But those of you who said it's going to have the impact of Amazon and the impact of speech recognition and so forth, you're kind of in tune with where the nation is. You may have seen this Time magazine last October with a giant banner headline written on a chalkboard, ironically, reinventing college. And the thing that got them to do this was not that something else was causing colleges to reinvent. It's really the idea that MOOCs were going to have such a huge impact. They were going to change the paradigm of how colleges worked, that MOOCs were really what Clayton Christensen calls a disruptive innovation, something that makes you completely change the way things occur for that. And so certainly there's this conception that MOOCs are going to be really important. In fact, it's gotten so big that people now, you begin to see some people poking fun at it with these fake movie trailers, make movie advertisements, MOOC hysteria. Or my favorite one is this one here. It may take a second to load, but the day of the MOOC. And this one refers to a different kind of MOOC, as we'll talk about in a sec. And you see the captions here, it's disrupting everything. So that refers to the disruptive technology idea of what MOOCs are. And then in the next line there, it's a tsunami of poorly understood pedagogy. And that's based on some statements that people have made about MOOCs being a tsunami that's going to sweep aside higher education. But what happens is that those of you who have been doing this for a while, you know that teaching is not the same thing as telling. And if you really want someone to learn things, you can't just tell it to them. You have to go beyond that. So MOOCs can be very effective, and particularly when you compare them to this kind of idea. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a classroom that you get the feel this one is, but this notion of just putting a lot of information out there to the students is the same as providing them with a quality education. I think those of us who do training development would know not necessarily the case. So MOOCs can be good compared to this, but they can also be done pretty poorly. Now, unfortunately, the ones that are usually done pretty poorly seem to be the ones that we hear most about. There are two kinds of MOOCs, generally, is what people think these days. There's let me see if I can write this down for you if you can see this. There's a MOOC X, and there's also a MOOC See. So the little history I gave you earlier about how MOOCs kind of got going, that was sort of the MOOC X thing, and I mentioned up in Canada some people were doing it differently. That's the MOOC See. The MOOC X idea, that's the MIT X, the edX, Coursera, Udacity, all of those. It's kind of the idea of instruction, a directed instructional approach, where you have a central content provider who sends that content out to all the learners. And maybe they send out a problem set for them to work, and they may give them minimal feedback about, yes, you got it right, no, you didn't get it right. But it's sort of a more of a broadcast approach. A MOOC See stands for a connectivist approach, and in this connectivist approach, it really tries to take more advantage of the affordances of social media and to hook all the learners up with each other. You realize if you have one professor with 160,000 students, the students aren't going to get a lot of quality time with that professor, and you then won't have much of a learning community. Well, on the MOOC See, they say, well, we realize that too, so what we're going to try to do is get the students to teach each other, to get them to build little mini learning communities where the whole big mess of them is kind of guided in one direction by the professor. And this is based on some theories of social constructivism, and it was put forth by Lev Vygotsky and some other ideas about how learning occurs. There are pros and cons to each of these, and I'll rapidly go through them because I apologize for that network drop. Kind of got us behind. In a MOOC X, then let me get back to the screen here. In a MOOC X, some of the pros are certainly it's free right now. You can just sign up for one and begin getting through the instruction right away. You can also have some access to world leaders in content areas. You can find Nobel laureates, and you say, hey, I took a class, sort of, from a Nobel laureate. This is, by the way, sort of the thing that has gotten a lot of the higher ed administrators worried. So they would think, why would anyone come to my little university if they could go to Harvard for free with that? The cons are, though, that there's a huge dropout rate. Between 90 and 98% of people drop out of these MOOC X's. The ones that finish them tend to already know the content to begin with. So it may be that those are people that are really looking to pull that content into their own courses. And as you would guess, there's very little personal instruction, virtually none, if you have the larger scale MOOCs. You just can't interact with the faculty members that way. Now the MOOC See, a little different pedagogy and one that is, I think, more promising. The idea here, you've got these many learning communities, the students all working together, the instructor is trying to guide them, and you do get individualized attention. It's largely from the other learners because, again, you don't have enough instructors to go around, but it can seem more personalized. You can build this notion of helping each other through the content, and they do have a somewhat higher attention rate than the MOOC X's, and they're up to 60% is the highest I've seen, but it varies greatly in terms of retention rate here. The downside of a MOOC See is these communities can flounder. If you have a small group of people, you could have one person that disrupts the whole thing, or people that gradually go away and they're not committed to each other. The instructor has a hard time keeping up with all of these different communities. There's no really guarantee of quality, and particularly in feedback. So if you're depending on your fellow learners, for feedback, well, and a lot of research shows that when you do this learner control research, learners typically make poor decisions about what they need to learn, and they're typically not very good at giving each other feedback. Some may be, but on the whole, they either tend to be way too generous and say, oh, everything you did was great, or you occasionally have people who are kind of mean and just really not even critically think it out, but just take the opportunity to belittle other people and berate them. So it's kind of a crapshoot, and you don't know what you're going to get in the CMOOC. But hopefully we'll get better than that. And the dropout rate, I see the question there. I think I mentioned it a second ago. It's as a completion rate of up to 60%, so at least a 40% dropout rate, and in fact it also goes down to 80%, so it's somewhere between 20 and 60% complete, the MOOC See. Still not very high. Again, if you're a highly motivated learner, you're very sophisticated, your chances are you're going to get through, you'll stick it out. Well, where I think we are now with MOOCs this is Gartner's hype cycle, it's called, and I think we're very much somewhere here at the peak of inflated expectations for MOOCs right now. They've gotten so much press. Everyone is very excited about them. They really feel like they're the silver bullet. Unfortunately, though, we're about to head down that trough of disillusionment. And this has happened with every single technology that has ever come out, I think. Blackboards were going to revolutionize education. Tape recorders, motion pictures were going to revolutionize education. Computers were going to do it. Everything that's come out has kind of gone through this same cycle. The good news is, though, that after we get past this trough of disillusionment, we'll probably find out where MOOCs fit in and find out what ideas from MOOCs we can take and really make work for ourselves. And that I think this year I think we'll start to do that a little more formally, and somewhere in the next 6 months, I guess, we'll start seeing, this part of the MOOCs is dumb, but this part of MOOCs is something that we can really use. And go from that. So I think, though, that there are probably three areas in which MOOCs will be valuable, and I'll go through those very quickly so we have time for questions at the end. The first kind of goes back to my interest in working in developing countries. This is a picture of a project that Sugata Mitra did. He worked in Delhi and realized that these kids were hanging around that never had gone to school, had no opportunity for education, and he wondered what would happen if he hooked these kids up with the internet. So he literally cut a hole in the wall of his office complex and put computers that were hooked up to the internet there, kind of like ATMs. He then he didn't notice within a couple of days the kids had learned to access, to work the computers, access the internet. He then went down to them and said, "Hey kids, I wonder what you could learn about biology on this internet. It's very complex. I don't think you'll learn anything, but give it a shot." So with no training, no formal schooling really, he didn't even know that the kids knew how to read. He left them alone. Oops, sorry, and came back 2 weeks later to find out what the kids learned about biology. And the little girl said, "Well, sir, apart from the fact that mutations in DNA lead to genetic variation, we've learned nothing." And that was pretty impressive, he thought. So he gave them a test, a standard biology test, and found they scored about 30% out of 100%. About 30% on the standard biology test. Not very good, but also not too bad to go from 0 to 30% with no intervention other than access to the internet. Then he said, "Well, what happens if I try the grandmother technique?" And so he got a grandmother, a pseudo-grandmother really, to stand there behind the kids and just say things like, "Oh, that's very nice. Oh, you did such a good job. Ooh, I wonder how this works." And just by encouraging the kids, see what they could do. Came back 2 weeks later, tested the kids again. Now they got 50% correct on the state biology test. Well, again, 50% not great, except that 50% is the same score that the kids in school got. So just by having someone encouraging them, they went from nothing up to the same score as the kids in school were getting. Well, MOOCs have this enormous potential, I think, to make organized education available to these kids. So these kids weren't in any kind of course, but now you can get that sort of world-class course, or at least world-class content available to kids. So there's a real chance for developing countries, I believe. Not everybody thinks that, but I think it's a real possibility. The other real possibility is, of course, for professional development and not only lifelong, but life-wide learning. John Bransford kind of did a study of how much time we spend in formal learning environments across the course of our lives. And then looked at, well, what if we take 16 waking hours per day and figure it that way as well? And so what he found was that when you're in K-12 in school, you spend about 18.5% of your time in formal learning. If you're an undergrad in grad school, you get another 12.8%. And then after that, you have little spotty times of formal learning throughout the rest of your life. I went back and took his numbers and added it all up. It comes out to about 3.8% of our waking hours are spent in formal learning. No, I don't really want to spend much more time in formal learning, but I do like the idea of informal learning. And MOOCs provide a great opportunity for us to do professional development, to become not only lifelong, but life-wide learners. Now we can easily get on the internet and instead of watching a sitcom, well, you could learn something. And it used to not be this easy. Those of you who've been around for a while, you know if you wanted to learn something outside of a formal context, you actually kind of had to work just to get that started. So that's a big impact, I think, that MOOCs can have for all of us, as making us both lifelong and life-wide learners. The third one is one that I think relates to most of us in training and development, and that has to do with MOOCs as a kind of content aggregator. This is a screenshot from Pearson's Blue Sky, and Pearson, you know, the publishing company. And they have this project, Blue Sky, where they have gone out and aggregated content, various types of content in a huge huge area of specialties, so anything you can imagine. You go to Pearson Blue Sky and you do a search for whatever your topic is. This was just a very broad search for learning, and it pops back with these content units that they have found, and the content units vary. They can be textbooks or websites about it or videos or interactive programs. They also have tests. They have note pages. They have readings. Well, you go through and look at all these sort of content things and click the ones you want, and then Pearson will bundle them together and sell them to you and your students. So that's their marketing scheme. But I think MOOCs are going to be a part of this, and I think probably in training and development in particular, they will form a resource that we can draw from to create customized types of content for our own constituencies. And that, I think, is that together with the lifelong learning is probably going to have the biggest impact on us. So let me skip this because we're just about out of time and get right to ask you, how many of you are planning to use MOOCs in the near future, and how likely are you to do that? Do that quick poll if you would, and let's see just what this audience thinks. Now you can either say that you're going to use MOOCs in your own work in the coming year, or you may use them in the next couple of years, or the third option is that you might do MOOCs personally, but you don't really use them in your own curricula, or the fourth choice is you don't think you'll use them at all. So let's see what kind of answers we get there.
Okay, we have the results.
Okay. Carmen, can you see the results there? The majority of the folks, of 44%, say I may use MOOCs within the next couple of years. 28% plan using MOOCs in the coming year. 31% only plan to attend MOOCs, and 3% not at all. So the majority of folks, according to the survey, say they plan to use MOOCs within the coming year or the next couple of years.
Great, thanks, David. And interestingly, too, I think we set the survey up wrong because you could only vote for one. But if you look at the fourth choice, 97% of you plan to do something with MOOCs in the near future. And I think that's the right attitude to take. MOOCs are evolving. And as I mentioned, to be successful in this industry, you have to be pragmatic. And there's certainly a tool that we're going to see some use out of. Now, whether they revolutionize all of higher education and training, I'm a little more dubious than that about that. But I do think that there's a great opportunity for us to take advantage of the resources that they offer. And you know that the pace of change today is 400 times what it was in our grandparents' day. So I think this final quote I'm going to leave you with here really holds true, that you've got to keep developing, you've got to keep learning, or else you just won't be able to compete in the future. And MOOCs are a very rich potential of allowing us to do that. So thank you very much. This is me and my contact information, and David and his contact information. And I'll pause here and open it up for questions.
Okay. Anybody, if you have any questions, please share through the chat, and Dr. Harmon will go ahead and answer those for you. Dr. Harmon, one person asked for examples of MOOCs in existence. I think you gave some of those examples.
Yeah, there are really lots of them. I'm teaching a class this semester actually on online education, or e-learning environments I call it. And it's an online course, and as part of that course I asked the students to participate in a MOOC. And so I, with very little effort, found 2 MOOCs dealing with online education, both through Coursera, and I told them they had to sign up for one or the other of those 2 MOOCs. One was just sort of a generic instructional design course for online environments. The other was a course sort of about online learning in society. Interestingly, 1 week into the course on online design, they canceled it because they didn't like the quality of it. And I have to say, because I'm at Georgia State, that course was out of Georgia Tech. And so they ended up canceling that course, and they weren't able to deal with the students and the quality. So, but you can find courses really on just about anything. If you go to the Coursera website or the Udacity website, You'll see them lots. Does any school offer a degree program using only MOOCs? And no, I don't know of any school currently that offers a degree program using only MOOCs. There are a very small handful of schools now that will allow you to get credit for MOOCs if you jump through certain hoops, but currently not. I think we may see this idea come about with some of the for-profit universities to start with, but some places, like for example University of Chicago, does participate in Coursera and offers MOOCs, but they specifically do not allow credits for MOOCs there. Interestingly, by the way, on this question, I apologize for the dog barking, interestingly on this question, one thing that we're behind in the U.S. a little bit is this concept of open universities that we've seen in Britain so successfully and in Canada. And the MOOCs could follow that model and allow credit that way. In K-12, interesting also they're not really, most MOOCs are intended at the university level currently, and so they're not MOOCs for K-12. I would see some kind of market for MOOCs in K-12. K-12 is generally highly regulated though, and so it's been more difficult to get that all worked out. But abroad, like I mentioned, in developing countries, there I think we see a real potential where people could pull MOOCs out and allow folks to do it. Interestingly, one course that they did on circuit boards that MIT did had very few people finish the course, and they had a test at the end, and very few people passed the test. But one person who did pass the test was a 15-year-old Mongolian student who had no other access to it, and so had really gotten into it. So possible that it'll take a while. Could MOOCs be an entry point to social learning in an organization? Yeah, I think so. I haven't seen any corporations purposefully embrace MOOCs yet and say this is an absolute part of our curriculum. I think we're still in the exploratory stage where people are sort of grabbing a piece here, grabbing a piece there. And as to whether they'd be an entry point to social learning, only if it was a MOOC See, that'd be the type that would perhaps have a social impact. I'd be dubious right now to just turn people loose on a MOOC. I'd want to really watch it closely because, as I mentioned earlier, there's no guarantee of quality. And by the way, I didn't mention, but plagiarism has been rampant in MOOCs as well. And that's a huge problem people are having to deal with right now. So I'd want to watch that. The good thing about MOOCs for training and development is you've got a set of highly motivated, generally sophisticated learners most of the time. So they're the kind of people that could succeed in MOOCs. iTunes University would be a MOOC. And again, huge variety of quality in the stuff at iTunes University. It's easy to put content up there, and there's no guarantee of quality. Generally, the iTunes University content is not organized at the course level. It's a smaller level than that. It's sort of a learning object a lot of times. You might have a lecture or a unit, but not at the entire course level, which the MOOCs purport to be. But I do think we'll see this merger of the whole course aggregators, the learning object type of aggregation with people making courses. So I'm hearing that University of Wisconsin does have an entire degree program with MOOCs only, and also Antioch University. So I'm not familiar with that. Chris has pointed that out. So that's very interesting, and we'll check that out. In both cases, you pay to take a competency exam, and that does seem to be a model that people are using. Workplace learning content examples. I haven't done a particular search on that, and so I can't speak for certain, but my guess is you'd be able to find lots of adult ed, andragogy, if you're familiar with that term, how adults learn. You'd be able to find a lot of business practices, perhaps even some sales content, although I'm not certain about that. A lot of CIS type of content or MIS type of content is out there. And do adult ed principles align with MOOCs? Well, about as well as they align with all higher education. In other words, hit or miss. Some people know about adult ed principles and can use them. Some people don't. They just kind of put the lecture online. Has anyone been able to secure a job based on accumulated MOOC courses like a build your own degree? And don't know about that yet. One of the things you see with MOOCs are people offer these certificates, or sometimes they call them badges. You can get a badge for attending a MOOC, and we may get to a point where when you go to hire someone, you look at this collection of all the different MOOCs and courses and badges they've accumulated. In fact, one of the potential profit models that Coursera and Udacity are putting forth is that they are going to use MOOCs for companies to recruit. In other words, they will weed through the hundreds of thousands of people they've had attend a MOOC and then provide lists for a fee to companies to choose some of the finishers from those MOOCs as potential employees. And they don't think they've done that yet, but that's a plan that they're doing it. Are MOOCs a way of universities advertising in an effort to get people to enroll in their schools, say, in online courses? I think so. And as I mentioned earlier about the universities being a little bit afraid of MOOCs, I think this is something that many universities have said, okay, we want to be on this steamroller. You've heard that old adage, if you're not part of the steamroller, you're part of the road. And some universities see this and they want to do that and see it as a way of expanding their brand. Universities have had to change their mindset from the traditional isolated conclave where people come to the university, and now universities are competing in the world market, and so they've seen it as a way at least of getting more exposure. Is there a how-to guide to get started, or just stick with YouTube videos and forget this until it's more mainstream? You know, it's free. So I'd say give it a try. I don't think it will be free forever. So I'd say give it a try now while it's still free. Go to Coursera or go to Udacity. You can Google them and find them very easily. Look through their offerings of courses, find one you like, and enroll. You may, like 90% of the other people, decide to drop out of it, but you may stick with it, and you may get what you want to get out of it as well. And I'm not knocking YouTube videos, by the way, because I think you can get a lot from them as well. The difference is MOOCs are theoretically, at least, more organized around andragogies and pedagogies. So, yeah, best thing to do, stick your toe in and test the water.
Okay, Dr. Harmon, in the interest of time, it's just a minute or two after 1. We're going to cut off questions for now. Lots of questions coming in still. I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. I'd like to thank all the folks that attended the webinar. As you can see, our contact information is up there on the screen if you have more questions that you want to send to Dr. Harmon. And again, the webinar will be posted on the TrainingPros website as soon as we can get it up there. And you can see our address, www.training-pros.com. I want to thank everyone very much, and we'll go ahead and end the webinar now. Have a great day.
Great. Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.